It's August 17, 2000, and I'm talking to Pete Wernick.
The bluegrass banjo style, anyway. So, but anyway, what are your questions?
First of all, can I? I'm interviewing a lot of people. Can I record this?
Yep.
That's okay. Fine. I just want to, and I've got that down. So, I came to this after reading what I thought was a spate of early to mid '90s, I guess mid '90s books, academic books on the folk revival of the '60s, with which I've been long familiar. I think there was a sudden surge in scholarship about that, people starting to pay attention and writing cultural histories about it. And I enjoy all those books. And as I was casting about for a long-term project, I said that I'm familiar with the very active scene going on right now that makes interesting social history, and nobody seems to be writing about that except the people who write among themselves, like Bluegrass Unlimited and Old Time Herald and Sing Out and things like that. But there's no...
Well, what are you actually after as your thesis topic?
Oh, I want to... That's a... You know, I've never distilled this into a good 30-second description, but I kind of... What's that?
Better.
Yeah, I understand. But I want to try and capture the state of the conversation circa year 2000 regarding what the word folk means today to people, whether it has any continued validity, how it's used in reality, and what the contentious issues are. I come from a premise, I think, of believing that, at least where music is concerned, if there are any folk in America, they're better off with publicists than with folklorists. I think that...
Well, it depends on their personal goals.
Sure, it does.
There's a big dichotomy. There's people who play entirely for the music itself and the social enjoyment amongst their circle of people they already know, and then there's other people who are very definitely focused on recognition by different amounts of the outer world, and then people make a transition, like Doc Watson, made a transition from being a local guy for the first 40 years of his life to being an international guy.
Right. And I'm not sure if the local guys need anybody except themselves and one another. Yeah, that's.
But they like this feller who comes in and acted interested in the old songs I learned from Mom.
Right.
They like that very much, but that's not what keeps them going. It doesn't affect them very much unless they let it, and they sometimes like what happened to Clarence Ashley or blah blah. Anyway. By the way, let me just mention something on the subject of distilling. I'm a doctorate myself.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
And I never liked to read that much, and I always resented the people who wrote these books I always had to read because they never got to the point, and they just didn't want people. It really didn't seem to matter if people were going to be easily understandable or not.
Right.
And I found writing my own dissertation that when I was really reaching for tricky words and concepts, it's usually because I didn't understand myself what I was trying to say. And I was trying to find just a word that left a lot of things vague.
Right.
And I could mean a lot of different things. And I thought, I got to go get more data so I know what I'm actually trying to say to people instead of just saying, hemming and hawing. And I found that a very useful thing in my own life if I notice that I can't say something succinctly, I better think about it some more.
Right.
Especially if my business is communication.
Sure.
Anyway, I thought you did a very nice job.
It is good advice, and I think about it a lot because the 30-second description issue comes up a lot. But one of the things that does bug me from other academics, other students, other professors, is when people at what is still a fairly early stage of a project say to me, well, what's your thesis? And I say, I don't have a thesis. I haven't finished my research yet. I have a premise. I have a subject in which I'm interested.
That's fine.
And I don't, and the thesis, why should I have a thesis now? I haven't done any research. I haven't talked to anybody.
Say, I'm exploring. I'm trying to discover things, and I'll come up with my conclusions after I've got the facts.
Right. One of the things that I have done, though, is I realized that I've got to approach this from some concrete way. I've got to look at, what vehicles do I use?
What is your goal? Is to discover, say, the meaning of the word folk music in contemporary America,
and the continued viability of that construct. Yeah.
Yeah, and whatever that means, what section of our, some society, some subculture is involved, and what's that subculture like?
Right.
What's going on with that subculture? Just portray it. Just take a snapshot of it, describe it.
Right.
That might be your premise, but I think just lay out your premise, and if they want a thesis, you don't even have to be, sound a little defensive. Just say, well, I'll let you know after I talk to everybody.
But one of the ways in which I've decided to approach this, in which I can make it concrete and find vehicles through which I can have the discussion, is by looking at organizations. I've been working largely with Rounder Records, and I think I might have mentioned that in the email to you. I probably did, okay. And the other has been the North American Folk Music Alliance.
Yeah.
And I'm also working with people who play traditionally based music around Austin just for fun, because I realized that Rounder and the Folk Alliance left me with big superstructure type organizations, but didn't leave me with these folks on the ground who are just, what does it mean to them?
Definitely, exactly. Like the field, the record company, the trade organization, and then the subject matter.
Right.
The people, and you would not be ill-advised to go to some rather different part of America and get the perspective there.
No, I agree. And
one place, but it's not necessarily indicative of everybody like that, and yet you're trying to talk about America.
Right.
And the Appalachian, anybody living in the mountains as opposed to within a reach of a relatively upscale community is going to be in a different place.
Sure, and I have talked to some people about that, although I wouldn't call them local players. I talked at length with Margot Blevins about Augusta and what she's doing there. And do you know, I would think from IBMA, do you know Randy Pitts?
Yeah, actually, he's an agent in the agency that...
Yeah. Right. Well, Randy and I are very close friends, and he and I are going to go... We took a road trip for fun just about 2 months ago through southwest Louisiana, and he's going to come back to Austin in about a month, and we're going to head off in my van to the Cajun Festival and see Randy Bedreen.
Cool. But watch out for the Cajun festivals, the place to be is more like in the parking lot.
Sure.
Anyway,
but
go ahead and start asking me questions.
Now, your earliest influences, you came from New York, right? And you were...
I grew up in the Bronx.
And you have...
I had friends who were sort of part of the folk music scene.
Right.
Just teenage kids who played guitars and stuff, and their summer camps were, like the kind of summer camp that Pete Seeger might go visit.
Right.
And so people were learning guitars and banjos and folk songs with the Weavers and Kingston Trio as some of the main influences, And back then there was even, the pop hit parade had here and there had, calypso or some kind of folkish kind of thing, Kingston Trio. So it was almost, local folk music in a way, because people did jam at each other's houses and stuff, and most of it was getting learned from records, but some of it really was within a social context, of these, mostly kind of liberal left-wing camps, this kind of thing.
Did you go to Washington Square and do that?
I did. When I found out that there was music going on there, I immediately started going down there every Sunday afternoon for the 4 hours that it was allowed to play, and there I got exposed to the best bluegrass musicians in the area, and I even ended up joining a band with people who I met there. And that's where I had my first encounter, say, with Jody Stecker and David Grisman. And that was very important scene back then.
Yeah. Now, how did you, jumping ahead a little bit, just to get into, how did you meet Ken Irwin?
Ken was in Ithaca at the same time that I was in Ithaca, and I moved there in 1970, and he moved there within the following year, and my wife drove a bus on the Cornell campus, and this would not be for quotations, just for a little laugh, but she said there's this guy with a terrible skin problem got on her bus, and she said, "What is the matter with you?" And he said, "I'm allergic to myself." And he had some kind of skin condition that really, it ended up being okay, but it turned out the same guy was part of a collective of people called Tio Hero that put out a publication which included scholarly folk music articles. And they were kind of a, hippie collective at a time when that was a rather commonplace thing in the Cornell environment. And then we would hear them that they were going to be trying to put on this concert or do this or that thing. And they kind of attached themselves to us a little bit because we had started a band around there, and we were some of the movers and shakers in the area. I think I forget. I had done radio and this and that, so Ken just sort of, we found each other in the natural way, and then they said, "Oh, we have this record company," and they were putting out records, and so I remember them putting on a J.D. Crowe concert and a Red Allen concert.
This is the Ithaca Friends of Bluegrass or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And Larry Johnson is a black blues guy, country blues guy who had lived in New York City, who I had met previously. They brought him up there. And Del McCurry. And anyway, then they started the record company, and me and my friends who were in this band, I got the idea that we could record a certain kind of bluegrass instrumental album featuring two banjos, which would be something that hadn't been done very much. And so me and Tony Trischka were sort of putting this record. We asked them if they would do a record of us, and they said, "Oh, sure," very informal. And within that year, we had released what was the first record for me or Tony and most of the other people on it. And it's called Country Cooking 14 Bluegrass Instrumental.
And that's
which is actually the name of our band, even though not everybody from the band was on this record.
Yeah.
And anyway, that began an ongoing formal relationship because they were excited about our record, and we were excited to be on the label, and we were some of the first people we knew who were even on any sort of a record, and it kind of was a big change in all of our lives. Until we made the record, I don't think anybody who made that record really thought seriously of themselves as a person who could make a career in music. And within a few years, we had all made the move to make a career of music, and this was a very obvious turning point. The fact that people would buy our record, that we could even make a record. When we first heard it, the playbacks, we were just amazed to hear something we did that sounded like a record. And like I said, it seems silly now because it's much easier to make a record now, but then you had to have a record company, and the recording equipment would be, we did it with just a 2-track tape recorder, 7 inches per second, not much better than just a high-quality home tape recorder. And we did it in a quiet room instead of a recording studio. We just went to a room on the Cornell campus, and so it was very humble beginnings. There was no contract between us. We just agreed. It was agreed we'd get 50 cents a record. We weren't talked about copyright and stuff, and it was really just hippies,
Exactly, and I was going to ask you. I asked Bill Nallon if he thought what he thought George Pegram thought of them, if he thought they were just a bunch of hippies, and he said, "For all I know, Pegram thought that we were RCA."
Charles Manson.
Right. But you guys, these were your friends. So did it really feel like a record company? Was the excitement of seeing that vinyl disc?
We knew that was something they were doing. We understood that they had money. There was some money floating around in their lives that they were ready and willing to spend on what they loved. And whereas other people, those were very highly politicized days, and they actually came at it as though this was part of their political statement, is that they were going to glorify, back then the phrase "the people," power to the people. The people was really like, if it had been Karl Marx, it would have been the proletariat.
Right.
In America, college land, it was called the people, and the people were the heroes, and us collegiate people were sort of the guilty children of the people who had exploited the people.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
And everybody was of the mind to try to get back with the people, to help the people have some ascendancy, and cultural ascendancy was something anybody believed in very easily. So the political aspect and the political mission fit, and back then they were into just sort of little rule violations, the way most people of that age group were. They were always looking for ways to beat the system and get in free and not have to pay for X, Y, and Z. And
right.
They ended up having to become a lot more legit and above board because they became a recognized company, with lawyers working for them,
Right.
But in the early days, it was really hand-to-mouth, kind of scruffy, mission-driven stuff, and it was cool. I mean, I admired them then, and I still admire them for the fact that they haven't ever, that I've seen, lost sight of their original love of the music and the empowerment of musicians.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily love everything they've done along the whole way, but then again, nobody's perfect.
Right.
I don't love everything I do, but especially Ken, who is the person I've maintained very regular contact with this entire time. His style and mine conflict at times,
Mm-hmm.
but I really respect. I wouldn't want to ever say anything about Ken without including the most important thought I have, which is that Ken has very tirelessly devoted himself toward the advancement of music, and a kind of music which, if he hadn't have picked up his ball, a lot of that music would be languishing, and maybe never really even gotten a chance to blossom, because part of the climate that allows music to blossom is an audience, and when you have an audience by way of recordings, you have a much bigger audience than the people that you can find within 100 miles or an area that you can travel to.
Right.
So here we were, a band in upstate New York, which, we played around upstate New York at the colleges just to have some gigs, and that was in effect a different enterprise than when we all went to the studio to record these certain instrumentals that were not even what we usually did when we gigged,
Mm-hmm.
And the existence of a record company to create an easel for us to paint our pictures meant some pictures got painted that just wouldn't have ever been painted, and then especially the way it opened up careers for us.
Sure.
The playing college gigs did not open up a lifetime of being a musician the way having good reviews coming in from national publications and people in faraway places acting interested in the music. That was at the time. It's very hard right now, 30 years later, to really remember how unique that was. There wasn't a lot of little labels. You couldn't just record something on your hard drive.
Sure.
Put it on the net. There was, you had to have the means of production. Back to Karl Marx,
Mm-hmm.
was the factories that went through the elaborate process of stamping out vinyl records. You couldn't just do a short run of speed. This was before the days of cassettes, which is hard to remember.
Right.
There only were vinyl records back then, and so when cassettes came in, people said, "Well, gee, I can make a good quality tape and just put out, make 50 cassette dubs," But not back then. You had to gear up presses that would print in 12-inch square jackets, and without a cache of money, you just didn't have access to getting your music out.
Right.
In previous days in country music, people had radio shows, and a lot of bands that never recorded at least had a weekly radio show. Those days had gone away, and there were not many outlets for recorded music and string band, music.
Yeah. Now, you'd said something interesting to me. You said that what came out on the record was even somewhat different from what you were doing. What were you doing in your shows before?
We had a bluegrass band. My wife and I kind of started it. We were the main vocalists of the band.
Mm-hmm.
And we did mostly kind of good time, happy bluegrass music that would go well at kind of college parties.
Mm-hmm.
People might even dance to it, in a kind of a raucous way.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the soulful. I'm not saying it had no soul, but it was sort of college entertainment,
Right.
rather than coming at it more like art.
Did you guys plan the record carefully once you realized?
Not really, but Tony and I, when we met each other, did an unusual thing at the time, which is two banjo players who wanted to find a way to play together instead of being just rivals and were having to take turns.
Mm-hmm.
The banjo player when people were all playing at the same time. Because Tony was in this band with us and actually played pedal steel more, and we were kind of like a country band when we started. So we were already bandmates, but we both played banjo, so we would sit around, and he lived at my house for a while, and we would make up these two banjo arrangements to things. And when we had a cluster of those, it just struck me that I didn't know of anybody else doing this kind of thing. The Osborne brothers had done it some years, quite a while before.
Mm-hmm.
Put some of it on a record, but it was, I thought, a very cool thing that wasn't really represented on records.
Right.
And it was definitely more unique than what the Country Cooking Band was doing. And the only reason the record got called Country Cooking is because several of the people we used on this banjo record were from the band Country Cooking. And when we had to call it something, there was enough people from Country Cooking on it to want to just use that name. And it led to a lot of confusion because the gigging band couldn't do what was on the record, and the record did not represent the gigging band.
Oh, I see. So you and Tony were really apart from an existent Country Cooking Band.
No, we were both in that Country Cooking Band.
Oh, okay, but so why couldn't you do it?
Started with him on steel and me on guitar,
I see.
being lead singer, and us doing the bluegrass occasionally.
I see.
And my wife, who at the time did not really play an instrument, was not at all on the instrumental record, and yet she was the lead singer in the Country Cooking Band.
I see. I got you.
And then by the time it came time to make a second record, we were starting to feel awkward about that, so we included a token amount of the actual Country Cooking Band sound along with another bunch of instrumentals that the band was not really doing.
Uh-huh.
Because we used a couple of guys who didn't even live in town that just came in for the recording.
Right. Now, had you considered recording before Rounder kind of surfaced in your lives through Ken?
No, not at all. Kenny Kosek, who is a friend of mine in New York City and who was on that first Country Cooking record, he was actually on a project with John Burke and some other people, some old-time musicians, and they were the first people I knew who put out a record. It was old-time music and I don't remember much about it. I think it was maybe called the Yankee Carpetbaggers or something like that, and that was done in New York City. And that was the first I even knew of anybody who was on a record out of all the people I knew. And records were made by RCA and Folkways and people, faraway places or something,
Had you even thought of presenting yourself to something like Rebel or County?
Didn't exist, I don't think. Oh, maybe they did, but no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. I mean, there was a sort of an epiphany that happened. We went ahead and recorded a little bit, almost for a sound check, on this room in the Cornell campus in May 1971.
Mm-hmm.
We'd gotten together. We were going to make this twin banjo record for our friends,
Yeah.
And then we recorded the stuff, and then the engineer who was running the tape recorder had just headphones for us to listen back on, and we started passing around the headphones while the playback was going on. And we started getting really giddy and laughing and being kind of almost hysterical because we were just guys who played music.
Right.
Now what we heard coming back to us sounded like a record.
Yeah.
And the idea of us making a record is sort of like you can be on TV and there you are up there with Dinah Shore and Ed Sullivan.
Right.
Like, duh.
Yeah.
With them, it just was so incongruous. It took us a while to get over it, almost. And then we went ahead and made the record, and we still did a lot of stuff out of naivete. The mix down was taking that 2-track tape and playing it, dubbing it to another 2-track tape so we could have a couple of fade-outs and adjust the balance left to right. We were mixing 2 tracks to 2 other tracks. And we did some really sloppy stuff, and we didn't even realize that we were doing something that would last for years and years and years, and we should take another few minutes and redo them, but we didn't understand.
Right.
You know, and later, when we were 5 years later, we're listening to these awfully executed fade-outs, thinking, what were we thinking? What were we not thinking? And as it turned out, about someplace in the 1980s, they wanted to reissue the two country cooking records under one CD with a few additions and deletions, and we went in studio with the original tapes, and we did a lot better.
Good. Pete, I'm going to have to, I have unfortunately barely scratched the surface of where I had hoped to go. But my problem, just so you know why I have to run off, is I have two kids under 10 about to get off a school bus, and I'm the only one here to take care of them.
A noble reason.
I would...
If you want to try me tomorrow morning, you're welcome.
Okay, I'll give you a try. I would appreciate that. Yeah, I've got an errand in the morning, but I'll give you a call and we can talk about setting something up.
And don't be too distressed if, once again, I end up putting you off, but I don't have anything at all on my calendar, and I'm going to put you there right now.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pete.
Okay,
right,
good
talk
luck.
to you. Bye-bye.
Oh, let me grab him. Who is this, please?
Thank you. Name is Michael Scully.
Sorry. Hello?
Hi, Pete. This is Michael Scully in Texas.
Yes.
I said I would check in with you, and I'm doing that. So.
Have a good time?
Now's...
For a while.
Okay, now's a great time for me. Good.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
going to put you on hold and get you in the other room.
Great, thanks.
You there?
I am here, and I'm going to put the recorder on again, if that's okay.
Okay.
Great. Just trying to pick up roughly in the area we were yesterday. What was, of the country cooking albums, I've seen the compilation on CD, and I know, on that at least.
The records were 0006.
Right.
Which was called 14 Bluegrass Instrumental.
Right.
And then there was Barrel of Fun.
Barrel of Fun, yeah.
And 0006 made it to cassette.
Uh-huh.
Barrel of Fun never did, so there's been no, and that's been out of print for quite some time. So.
Yeah. And I've examined all of these, or a lot of them, at the Rounder offices. I've spent a lot of time just looking through their notes and sort of getting the gestalt of what their records looked like in the 70s. But I on this one, I don't recall. There's no producer credit on the CD, and I don't know if you...
Well, it was just, it was all of us.
Yeah.
It was very informal in the way, it was...
Kids would...
Not that much more organized than a jam session. In fact, the man now known as Lou Martin, who at the time his name was Harry Gilmore.
Right.
Then, and everybody called him Tersh, because it was a nickname because he was the third, tertiary.
Right, okay.
He kind of was bossy and kind of helped set a lot of the tone. He's also respected by all of us, but his sensibilities had a lot to do with the artistic factors that went into the first album, which was a relatively conservative album considering what we were all into and capable of. We kind of kept coming back to the fact that if we just did a standard bluegrass sound on everything, it would work for us as well as being palatable to a larger audience,
Right.
And some vague aspect of that was understood and appreciated by us. By the time that was successful, we figure, okay, we did that. Now, Barrel of Fun will pull out some of the stops, and we had the access by that time to a 16-track recording studio. A couple of the people, by now there's people in the band with seriously long hair and just sort of, the looser attitudes that went with that. And we recruited Andy Statman. By this time, Tersh had disappeared. He actually moved out west and was incommunicado for quite some time, years. And we happily replaced him on that record with Andy Statman, who was a, real hippie at the time, and also had learned how to play saxophone. And we thought, oh, let's use some saxophones. So
Right.
we stuck saxophone right on a few cuts where we realized that it would offend people, but we sort of almost liked that.
Okay.
And then there was a synthesizer available, and we used a little bit of synthesizer on one cut. There was a piano introduction with the saxophone to one of the songs, and we, as I mentioned yesterday, for the second record, we thought it was okay to add, a few references to our other life as a country band with vocals and steel guitar. So Tony got to play steel guitar in a couple of cuts, and those were very, very different sounding cuts than the other all instrumental cuts, and they ended up getting deleted when we put out the CD compilation because they weren't instrumentals. The concept of the CD was just to get the instrumentals down.
And now, was the female vocalist, is that your wife?
That's my wife. She was currently
Nandi Leonard?
Leonard.
Right.
Nandi was kind of a nickname. Her real name's Joan.
Okay.
And later she became Joan Wernick. Because we got married subsequent to the recording of those records, and she started using my name. So, but it's the same person. We've been together all these years.
Yeah. Now, did Ken play a role in that, aside that you can quantify?
He was encouraging, but he didn't really insert himself very much that I can remember.
Right.
And the big difference between the first and the second record aesthetically was that it's hard to even imagine this, but guys like Kenny Kosek and Tony Trischka and Russ Fahrenberg had not yet started writing tunes.
Yeah.
And Tony wrote one just in time to be included in the first record, which wasn't even that great of a tune, but it was his first one. And then by the time we were ready to get the second record together, everybody on the record, John Miller on bass, Russ Fahrenberg, me, I had written tunes. I was the only person with original material, contributing into the first record other than that one by Tony.
Right.
But Kenny and then Andy, everybody had original tunes. Some of them could have had, would have been, they'd already written enough tunes so we could have done the whole record of their tunes. But everybody instead, we kind of each contributed 2 tunes to the second record.
Right.
And it was great. There was a real variety of approaches, and I thought the tunes were really good. Everybody wrote at least one of their 2 songs were ones that I think still deserve to be in the, right up there in the, upper shelf of bluegrass instrumentals.
I know Ken has called Kentucky Bullfight a career tune for Tony. I don't know if
I totally agree, and I thought the execution, we did that on the first take, and we were just really pleased with it. Tony played his butt off. It's a great tune. It's a very creative tune in the way he used a retuning on the banjo, which gave him an opportunity to create a whole bunch of different sounds that hadn't been played before on the banjo, and then he wove them together very skillfully, and it was just a great tune. And unfortunately, it got on the vinyl record. It was the last cut of one side, I think, or the next to the last cut, and again, we were so naive about mastering and pressing that you just thought you sent the tape in, and then the record comes out. And along the way, a poor job was done of mastering and pressing, and there was what they call intergroove distortion. When you have a record with a lot of time on it, the inner grooves, that is the last couple of cuts, suffer, and there's distortion. And so what I thought was the best cut on the record was made much less listenable, and it was not until it got reissued on CD that it could be really heard what it really sounded like. So luckily we were able to, cure a certain problem, but it took 15 years almost for that to happen.
Now, you referred to the records as a success, and in context, what do you mean by that? Since I guess they didn't go too far.
Huh?
I guess they didn't go too far, at least at the time. But what did?
They were the best sellers of Rounder Records for the time because they outsold George Pegram and the Spark Gap Wonder Boys, and we were a band that existed by name at least. So we continued to sell the records, and it got reviewed in a bunch of places. It got good
It did?
reviews,
Uh-huh.
and we even had a sticker made, bragging, with the great reviews on it to help it sell some more. And it eventually, it sold 30,000 records.
Has it done that to date? Is that with the CD format or the?
Well, no. The CD might be responsible for the last few thousand of that.
Okay.
But as a vinyl record, it sold a lot. It was
Mhm.
Book of the Month Club selection for a while, which added thousands to its sales.
And this was back in its day, back in the early and mid
No,
'70s.
the Book of the Month Club thing happened maybe say in the late 70s. I
Mhm.
forget just when, but it was an active.
Right.
It was really moving. It moved thousands as a Book of the Month Club selection, but as I recall, I tried to keep track of the royalties and the totals, and as I recall, the figure 30,000, including the Book of the Month Club stuff, was reached, and that's a lot for any bluegrass record.
Oh,
It's huge for a bluegrass record, in fact, and it was one of the bigger ones in the catalog of Rounder, and Rounder was also excited about who was on it, because as time went on, people like Tony and Andy and Russ Fahrenberg were making their own Rounder records,
Right.
and that added ever more esteem to our first effort, which was a collaborative effort. It's sort of like a super group, an all-star group, but instead of their all-stars first and then they make a record together, we made the record together and then became all-stars.
Right.
Everybody on that first record went on to make solo records under their own name, and that's not very common. Even John Miller, the bass player, of course, he was a great guitar player, and he made a lot of solo records as a guitar player.
What did it do for you as a working band? Did it have an impact on that?
Well, sure. You call up a guy who's booking college concerts and say, "I'll send you our record," and even though we don't play all instrumentals, here's a record, and then you accompany it with some reviews from national publications, and that definitely is a cut above the average band trying to get that kind of work.
Right.
So it helped us, and I was very industrious. I called people booking concerts at almost every college in the state that seemed big enough to have concerts, and we would travel to all corners of the state to play, a concert or an afternoon, beer blast is what they called it,
Right.
And they paid pretty good money, and we'd set up and play a couple of hours while people sat around and got somewhat buzzed on beer.
Right.
And we actually stayed fairly active. We ended up getting a few festival jobs. Festivals were still new at the time. There weren't that many of them, but we got hired by a couple of significant festivals and got to play not as a big headliner. Although one comical thing happened where somebody saw the name Country Cooking and thought it was the food concession, and actually put had big letters at the top of the poster, bigger than the letters they used for Bill Monroe and Jim and Jesse. And so that was a funny poster to have copies of. But no, we never went that far as within the bluegrass performing festival realm. We were definitely more of a local band that traveled to a few different states, and we all had other primary occupations. In fact, when Tony and Kenny and Andy decided they really wanted to go full-time into it, they understood that would mean starting a different band, not just moving to Ithaca and trying to make Country Cooking happen. So that's when they started Breakfast Special.
Right.
And Tony moved out of Syracuse for the first time in his life, and that's when they were the first people out of that bunch who actually undertook musical careers full-time. Later I did, and later Russ did, and later John did, and Russ and John both went back to kind of straight jobs with music on the side. But when I made my break with my academic career track, that was it. That was it in 1974, which was, I guess, I think that might have been, I forget when Barrel of Fun came out, but it was either 73 or
73 or 74, yeah. I've got charts with all this stuff that Bill has given me. But now, Your doctorate is from Columbia, right?
Yes.
So at what level of academia were you during the early 70s when these records were
Well,
being made? 'Cause
I
you were
had
at
a
Cornell.
job at a thing called the International Population Program at Cornell,
Okay.
where I did research basically, and along with the research I was doing for my thesis.
So you were a Columbia student.
Correct, and that's
Okay.
where I got the degree from. But
Gotcha.
I had a good relationship with the department there at Cornell, and I actually got paid, and given an office space
Okay.
to do some research up there, some population aspects they were wanting.
Now, there was a third country cooking record, and that was on Flying Fish,
well,
right?
that was after Russ and John both just, had enough of it. Both of them were getting into jazz, and they just wanted to move on musically. So they both quit in '74, and some friends of mine that I'd known from New York City, Alan Sinocki and Howie Tarnower, they were now living in San Francisco, but itching to move back east and wanting to be in a band. And they proposed to move to Ithaca and put together a band with me and my wife,
Okay.
which we said fine. And then, it was awkward, but we ended up calling that group Country Cooking.
I see. Okay.
And it was more of a connection between that and the performing country cooking than the recording country cooking, because we were now just left with one person from the recording country cooking, me.
Yeah.
But we had the two principal singers from the performing country cooking, so we
Okay.
had just about enough credibility, and it was so much more convenient to use an existing name that could get work.
Right.
So with some reluctance, we kept the name Country Cooking for what was now a rather different group.
Why'd you shift labels?
That's a good question. Alan had he had a rapport with Bruce Kaplan, who had started Flying Fish.
Right.
And I think perhaps we were already starting to feel a little bit of friction with the Rounder people over just stupid nuts and bolts details of, like, when are we going to get paid, and things that just felt a little uncomfortable, nothing drastic. But I thought, well, let's show them we don't have to be with them just, when we're making a record. So the first calls went to Bruce Kaplan, and he said, yes, let's do it. So I was ready to switch.
Right.
And that worked out fine. The only problem is the band, wasn't as... there was a cluster of factors, but one of them was that, the band was a little sort of more hard-edged and soulful, and was as easy a fit with the Beer Blast college crowd to hear people singing really meaningful songs with a kind of an edgy overtone to them, as opposed to Jimmy Martin Hit Parade of Love type songs,
Right.
which is more like what the older country was doing with fast instrumentals and stuff. So it wasn't clicking quite as well, and both my wife and I also started getting the urge to move out of Ithaca. I had some success with my bluegrass banjo instruction book, which was a milestone in my life, because once it came out, this is when dueling banjos was quite the rage.
Okay.
And my book suddenly sold 20,000 copies right as soon as it came out, and I had enough money to live on from the book, so that gave me courage to quit my job and move to the part of the country where I thought I would enjoy myself better.
Is that when you went to Colorado?
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
okay.
we started to move. I mean, this band with Howie and Alan were called the Fiction Brothers, as you may know. They just called themselves the Fiction Brothers to kind of be cute.
Right.
They did sound like brothers and almost seemed like brothers in some ways. And that went from 74 to 75, and during 75 we traveled. We got some dates in Colorado, festival dates, some other stuff, and that's when my wife and I decided to move here, and she had grown up in Colorado, so it was somewhat familiar to her, but I liked the idea that we'd get someplace where the weather was better and there was a good music scene here. I should mention another thing. I don't know if this is important or relevant, so stop me, but
Go ahead.
one thing that might have been a friction point between us and Rounder, and that was sort of initiated by me, was was that, with Dueling Banjo's a big hit, and with us having two good banjo players on one record, I really thought that there were going to be major labels happy to sign an instrumental bluegrass band featuring two banjos.
Right.
Could you hold on one second? I just got to
Sure.
do something. I'll be right back.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Anyway, so when we had started recording Country Cooking, and I think we were paying the bills for the studio. I'm not sure. Probably were. It was a 16-track studio, and we thought we were getting good recordings. And blah, blah, blah. And so I took the recordings to. I actually had some friends who were involved in major labels in New York, people who would A&R people and whatnot. So I shopped the record down in New York and went in person to a lot of places and talked to people and found that there was a lot of enthusiasm, spoken enthusiasm for it, but nobody was really wanting. They considered Dueling Banjos a fluke.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that if there was anything that it said was popular, it was the dueling factor, not the banjo factor.
Okay.
And then even with Deliverance, I mean, there was a lot of interest in the banjo. Like my book sold so well, and it was a great year for bluegrass and the banjo. Also, the Circle Be Unbroken album by the Dirk Band came out right at that time as well. So there was a lot of people wanting to get into it, but the majors did not catch on and basically turned down our record, even though they made a lot of nice comments about it.
Right.
And then we went back to Rounder, but about that time Rounder was sort of like, what are you doing? They didn't like it, that I had this upward mobility idea. And that, I'm sure, I can't recall all the details, but that was part of the friction as well, I'm sure. Not that we were enemies or something, but just there wasn't this easygoing comfort we had when we just said, oh, can we make a record for your label? Oh, sure. And there was not even a contract.
Right.
It was all so informal and
Right.
just trusting friends in the hippie way.
Right.
Here we were kind of getting a little above our raisins, so to speak.
Sure.
Anyway.
No, I'm glad you went off on that tangent. It actually feeds into a question I have here in my notes. Both Ken and Bill independently have told me of something that was lingered with them for a long time,